Hello friends, welcome to Folk Beats. Friends, today's episode is very special because we are going to pay a tribute to Bali Jatti, who was a renowned theatre actress and singer. And not only an actress, she was also an entrepreneur. Today, to talk about her life, we have invited Mr. Nadeem Omar from NCA Lahore. He is currently acting as the Director of Research and Publications there. Welcome to our studios.
Thank you for having me here.
Nadeem Sahab, you have extensively researched, and for your research you have traveled a lot. So let's start with folk traditions and folklore itself.
Folk traditions are in fact, are the ones that give any social group their identity. It actually reflects their ways of doing things, their belief system, their deep-seated values, their expression, their pains and sorrows. It actually captures, the entire sort of a complex of your social life, how you have conducted your life in a certain point in time is actually, a category called folk culture. On every culture, irrespective of the time span, had a folk culture and then an urban culture. So people lived in villages let's say, in sort of hundreds of years ago, and still today we have villages and towns. So, and folk is the primary sort of identity of a social group, which makes it distinct from other groups. So it's almost like a cultural identity marker of every region, that every region have a distinct folk tradition which should continue and also reflects on the urban culture.
So if we look at music, music has always been a very strong medium of instruction as well as passing on folk tradition from one generation to another. And in that we see that folk theatre itself is a very, very strong form of performative art itself, but we don't really give it that much value.
Yes, I think in order to understand the place and the significance of each of these, let's say, forms of expression, whether it is music or it is dance or it's theatre, for that matter, we have to place it in that historical context in which these forms evolved, and also see what has changed that has led us to somehow disown those older folk forms of expression. And that particular context, you mentioned theatre, I think, and this is where the Bali Jatti comes in. But the theatre was not just an isolated marginal affair as we see it today. For instance, now the theatre, popular theatre or street theatre, is being performed in a certain fixed venues, which are isolated, let's say, buildings like, Arts Council or some other open-air theatre in Lahore or elsewhere. So it is pretty much a segregated affair where there is a select audience who will only come in to watch the theatre itself. There's nothing else. I mean, you'll buy a ticket and you'll, get into an auditorium or an open air where you will see a certain performance. And then the performance you walk away and go back home, maybe eat out somewhere. Whereas in earlier times, theatre was more of a large-scale festival, if you like. Theatre was one of the parts of a large-scale festival, large-scale cultural festival, where there were variety of performance, and theatre was one of them. For instance, I mean, and it was only for largely for the entertainment. It was the entertainment industry of the age. In the later period, let's say, I mean, theatre. If you look at the theatre in terms of history in South Asia or in India subcontinent, as it is called, you will see that the Parsi theatre was very popular and it was performed in all over the urban centers. And then there were these folk theatres, which were actually absorbing the influence from the urban theatre, but catering to a different audience. For instance, in the folk theatres, of which Bali Jatti was a very central character at certain point in time, were the ones who were playing folk themes, like folk tales, folk stories, folk romances, catering to the actual spiritual and intellectual and emotional needs of the audience who would frequent that. So they were not, kind of scripting things from their own creative end. They were actually trying to cater to a live audience, which if didn't like the performance, can walk away. Can actually would lead to the closure of the theatre and so on and so forth. So it was something which was very interactive, unlike cinema, where you show a film, either you like it or not, you can't give a direct feedback to the actors or to the directors. Where in the live theatre performance, it was actually you have to have, as they say, your hand on the pulse of the audience. If you lose the pulse, you are out of business. So these people like Bali Jatti, they were the ones who were able to actually gauge the level of interest and also steer their career accordingly. So what I'm saying is that theatre, before we get down to talk about an individual, legend, if you like, you have to understand that it was a large-scale affair. There were various kinds of, like there's a circus, Lucky Rani Circus was a very famous brand name, and there were other circus groups as well, who were in fact the largest sort of because of the scale of the circus. There are variety shows, lots of variety shows. So it was like one of the variety shows that you will have, where, sort of there was a lyrical performance, there's a dance performance, and there is a recounting of these tales which were already known to public. So I think it was a very live, powerful affair in older times, and which no longer is the case because of the shift in the technology.
And it was sometimes it also displayed the evolving nature of culture, because initially only men were dominating the theatrical scene, and then women also came in, and you were also mentioning transgenders. There was a time when transgenders used to perform there. So, sorry.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, women's entry, it's a men's world. I mean, the audience of these theatre largely comprise of men. So you can very well imagine the challenges any woman like Bali Jatti will face in this men's world. And then, of course, as you know, in the real world, it is not, it's not only charm and the beauty. It's also exploitation and the misery. So I think the real lives of these women who were being adored on or turned into a popular legends for the media industry led very isolated, marginal, suffocating lives. Behind the curtains, imagine just the odds. Now when I think of it, just imagine the odds of a group of women who is traveling with these hundreds of men, and they are actually living day in and day out with in this men's world. So imagine the level of what level of isolation and exploitation these women will face from the day one. Who would hire you and how would you hire you, in what terms? And then if you become successful, what will become of your career? All these choices were made by men for the woman. But the remarkable thing about Bali Jatti, the reason that we celebrate her, that she actually rose above, she battled all the odds. If you look at her domestic life, from the early on, she had a battered life. She eloped with a man who actually then in turn kind of sold her into a certain kind of business. So she had a forced entry into the theatre world. But once she was in there, she fought for her survival and rose to the top. As you said in the introduction, she is the one who is not just only a beauty queen or a thing of beauty on the stage. She was a very ruthless business person. She's one of those pioneers. She started owning a company, she ran a business, and she would actually was the queen of the business world of that time. There were big investors who were trying to back up. So I think if you look at the scale of business, we celebrate Bali Jatti only as a performing artist, right? But I think it is equally important to actually, understand, as you rightly said, as an entrepreneur. So what about the entrepreneurship itself? And she has definitely set a very high bar for the women, because this folk theatre has transitioned into other things, like cinema. So if you are a woman who is an actress and then we would like to play as a director and then you want to maybe own, film company, I think this is the way to go. And that is why character of Bali Jatti is still relevant. It arose from a folk tradition, from a folk sort of milieu, and then actually entered into the world of big business of her times.
So how about we play a clip of Bali Jatti's performance for our audience?
Yes, we talked so much. Why not?
Friends, let's watch a clipping from 1987 where Bali Jatti is performing a very famous song, Neel Karaiyan.
ਮੈਂ ਹਾੜਾ ਦੇਨੀਆਂ ਰੱਬ ਦਾ ਜੱਟਾ ਘੋੜੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੋਰ ਹਾੜਾ ਦੇਨੀਆਂ ਰੱਬ ਦਾ ਜੱਟਾ ਘੋੜੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੋਰ ਸੌਂਦਾ ਨਾਲ ਯਕੀਨ ਦੇ ਸੌਂਦਾ ਨਾਲ ਯਕੀਨ ਦੇ ਬਾਲੀਏ ਦੁਆ ਕਦ ਤੇ ਸੱਟ ਨੀ ਤੂੰ ਸੌਂਦਾ ਨਾਲ ਯਕੀਨ ਦੇ ਹੋਰ ਨੇ ਸੌਂਦਾ ਨਾਲ ਯਕੀਨ ਦੇ ਸੌਂਦਾ ਨਾਲ ਯਕੀਨ ਦੇ ਦੋ ਕਦ ਤੇ ਸੱਟ ਮੈਂ ਛੇ ਦਿਲਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਭੌਂਕਦਾ ਛੇ ਦਿਲਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਭੌਂਕਦਾ ਛੇ ਦਿਲਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਭੌਂਕਦਾ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਪਾਣੀ ਨਾਰ ਬਗਾਨੀ ਕੱਢੀਏ ਨਾਰ ਬਗਾਨੀ ਕੱਢੀਏ ਨਾਰ ਬਗਾਨੀ ਕੱਢੀਏ ਕਾਫਰਾਂ ਨੇ ਰੱਖ ਨੀ ਕੰਧ ਦੇ ਜਾ ਤੇਰੇ ਦਿਲ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਕੰਧ ਦੇ ਜਾ ਤੇਰੇ ਵੀਰ ਨੂੰ ਕੌਣ ਆਖੇ ਮਿਰਜ਼ਾ ਜੱਟ ਕੰਧ ਦੇ ਜਾ ਤੇਰੇ ਵੀਰ ਨੂੰ ਕੌਣ ਆਖੇ ਮਿਰਜ਼ਾ ਜੱਟ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਨੀਵੇਂ ਨੀਵੇਂ ਝੌਂਪੜੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਨੀਵੇਂ ਨੀਵੇਂ ਝੌਂਪੜੇ ਰੁੱਖਾ ਬਾਜਰਾ ਪਾਈਆਂ ਬਾਜਨੀ ਜੋੜੀਆਂ ਪੁੱਤਰਾ ਬਿਨਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਨਾ ਪਾਈਆਂ ਬਾਜਨੀ ਜੋੜੀਆਂ ਪੁੱਤਰਾ ਬਿਨਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਨਾ ਭਾਈ ਮਰੇ ਤੇ ਬਾਹ ਭੱਜਦੀ ਭਾਈ ਮਰੇ ਬਾਹ ਭੱਜਦੀ ਪੁੱਤਰ ਮਰਨ ਤੇ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਉਹ ਪੁੱਤਰ ਮਰਨ ਤੇ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਪੁੱਤਰ ਮਰਨ ਤੇ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਨਾ ਉਹ ਲੋਕੋ ਰਸੀਆਂ ਦਾ ਤਰ ਵੰਡਦੇ ਧਰ ਵੰਡਦੇ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਉਤਰ ਗਿਆ ਦੇਖਾਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਚਾਰੇ ਕੁੱਟਾਂ ਸੁਣਨੀਆਂ ਓਏ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਚਾਰੇ ਕੁੱਟਾਂ ਸੁਣਨੀਆਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਮਰੇ ਪਿਓ ਤੇ ਮਾਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸਭੇ ਪੀੜਾ ਮੰਦੀਆਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸਭੇ ਪੀੜਾ ਮੰਦੀਆਂ ਓਏ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸਭੇ ਪੀੜਾ ਮੰਦੀਆਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸਭੇ ਪੀੜਾ ਮੰਦੀਆਂ ਬੁਰੀ ਭਾਈਆਂ ਦੀ ਪੀੜ ਸਭੇ ਪੀੜਾ ਮੰਦੀਆਂ ਬੁਰੀ ਭਾਈਆਂ ਦੀ ਪੀੜ ਪੁੱਤਰ ਮੋਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਭੁੱਲਦੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਮਰਨ ਫਕੀਰ ਪੁੱਤਰ ਮੋਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਭੁੱਲਦੇ ਲੋਕੋ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਮਰਨ ਫਕੀਰ ਪਰ ਖਾਦਾ ਤਾਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਟਦਾ ਖਾਦਾ ਤਾਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਟਦਾ ਥੱਲੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ ਨੀਰ ਖਾਦਾ ਤਾਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਟਦਾ ਥੱਲੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ ਨੀਰ ਉਹ ਕਾਨੂੰ ਪੈਣਾ ਜਿਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਵਿਛੜ ਜਾ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਸੀਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਭੈਣਾਂ ਜਿਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਹੋ ਉਹ ਕਾਨੂੰ ਭੈਣਾਂ ਜਿਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਕਾਨੂੰ ਭੈਣਾਂ ਜਿਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਵਿਛੜ ਜਾ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੀਰ ਤੁਰਦੇ ਮਿਰਦੇ ਜੱਟ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਰਦੇ ਮਿਰਦੇ ਜੱਟ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਈ ਰੋਕੇ ਆਣ ਮਾਂ ਰੋਕੇ ਆਣ ਵੇ ਤੂੰ ਨਾ ਜਾ ਪੁੱਤਰ ਮੇਰਿਆ ਨਾ ਜਾ ਪੁੱਤਰ ਮੇਰਿਆ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਣਾ ਜਾਣ ਨਾ ਜਾ ਪੁੱਤਰ ਮੇਰਿਆ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਣਾ ਜਾਣ ਵੇ ਮੈਂ ਰਾਤੀ ਖਾਬਾਂ ਵੇਖੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਮੈਂ ਤੇ ਰਾਤੀ ਖਾਬਾਂ ਵੇਖੀਆਂ ਮੈਂ ਰਾਤੀ ਖਾਬਾਂ ਵੇਖੀਆਂ ਮੇਰਾ ਚਿੱਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਹਿ ਗਿਆ ਥਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਸ਼ੇਖ ਨਾ ਟੁੱਪ ਵੱਟ ਕੇ ਸ਼ੇਖ ਨਾ ਟੁੱਪ ਵੱਟ ਕੇ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਵੇਖ ਖਲੋਤੀ ਗਾਂ ਸ਼ੇਖ ਨਾ ਟੁੱਪ ਵੱਟ ਕੇ
What a beautiful song, Nadeem
Yes.
Saab. It feels like a very festive song, but I think there are underlying symbolic meanings in it as well.
I'm sure. I mean, this
because
was the beauty of
theatre was not only a source of entertainment, it also displayed some resistance that was happening in this social society, the upheavals, wrongdoings as well, maybe.
Yes, I very rightly said so. I mean, you know, theatre especially, like all other, you know, sort of forms which are, you know, for the popular consumption, have to actually rhyme with the public sentiments. I mean, one of the, I'm sure, I mean, somebody who has analyzed the theatrical sort of performance, the scripts of the dramas in which Bali Jatti played her role, they would realize that those themes like the Maula Jat famous Molajat film,
Yeah.
which resonated very strongly with the political upheavals of the time, became immensely popular. I think such sort of reasons must have been there, the kind of themes that they engaged in. They must have resonated very strongly with the people's feeling, thereby attracting these crowds of people to the theatre performance. So theatre performance, one has to realize that the beauty of the folk is that the folk actually finds a way for itself, because it is actually coming from your roots. You can't, even if you want to even kind of forget your folk culture, it will actually come upon you as a surprise. You will never see that you are actually responding to the elements of your folk culture. So I think such is the persistence of the folk themes in the modern world as well. And generally it is understood that with the advent of the modernity, the folk culture loses its material basis. Like, all these, let's say, all these artifacts of the folk culture that we no longer use, the utensils for that matter, the household items, our sort of culture has completely changed in a way. So we tend to think that since we're no longer living in the traditional houses, so we can actually probably no longer need those traditional household items, and we have switched over to the modern Western lifestyle. But I think as an anthropologist you will appreciate that if you look at even the very use of those modern sort of artifacts of life, you will see that we still use them in a very traditional way. For instance, a very sofa that you sit on, we actually sleep on, kind of flatten on a sofa, like we flatten on a charpai. Now we are accustomed for centuries, our motor nerves are accustomed to be sitting on a charpai, with no back. Right? Whereas a sofa, the primary support that the body gets is actually the back, right? And I've noticed time and again that our use of these modern sort of furniture is actually built on our sort of folk ways, right? So in the similar vein, I see that this particular transition that has taken place from the folk theatre to other forms of modern entertainment. There are, we did talked about like Arif Lohar and Alim Lohar's son Arif Lohar transitioning into this modern entertainment industry with the music folk instruments. These folk instruments have a symbolic value, right? But it also have a aesthetic value as well. If it's not syncing in the orchestra, it will not be considered relevant. So, but I think you see that like drum beat. Drum is again something which is a folk instrument, and still it is part of our modern music. So I think folk never dies.
It's very
it
close to
changes
our
its
heart.
forms.
Yeah.
And what we fail to see is that this persistence of folks in a new garb, in a new sort of outward appearance. So we tend to associate folk with certain forms which become irrelevant in certain ways, because of the change in the sort of a physical infrastructure, technology. Those items become slightly out of fashion. We can't cling to them for the sake of our heritage. We have to see how they can be transitioned into new forms that are still relevant for this evolving, changing society. So I think that is the power of the folk theatre, the character of Bali Jatti, that the kind of challenges that Bali Jatti has faced are the challenges which are very similar as a woman, that the modern Pakistani woman in entertainment or in industry or in employment or in education are facing. So I think that then gives us the necessary inspiration. If you think as a woman, I would draw a lot of inspiration for a character who is so strong, who can take on the men's world on their own terms and still not give up despite these severe limitations on their acts they have to rely on men in order to make their decision. If they become too public, they can be drawn into controversy. So all kinds of challenges that the modern woman facing today has been faced by these folk artists who rose from a very humble origins and became like a brand in themselves.
In fact, Bali Jatti had a fight with the Inayat Hussain Bhatti, and she separated from his company and formed her own company. So that's a great source of inspiration, and this sort of events are really celebrated in today's world, thinking that it's something unusual. But we see that this was happening 4 or 5 decades back as well.
Yes, I think this actually then resonates with another very important point. That generally, sort of a struggle for the women's rights is seen as a Western agenda. It is seen as an impose from above. It is seen as the urban woman trying to save the rural woman, right? It is seen for emanating from the cities and the hotels and from the foreign fundings to the people as a Western tool of domination, so to say, according to the popular sentiments. But when you look at and celebrate the characters of the likes of the Bali Jatti, you realize that the struggle for women is a very homegrown affair. It is actually in our roots. I mean, if you look at the celebration of women in our sort of folk poetry, you see that in several of our renowned poets have used woman as a metaphor for resistance, as a metaphor for fighting against oppression, right? So I think in the similar terms, it goes a long way to establish the credentials of a women rights movement in the country. When you see that there were women, always a woman, who were wanting to break those shackles and wanting to actually be themselves, to not to be judged on the basis of their gender, right? They always wanted to do that, but we were the ones, as a part of the patriarchal order, who would not let the woman rise. So I think if these are the legends, and there are, I'm sure, other legends in all walks of life who needs to be celebrated in order to make a point. And if the woman is coming from closer to our roots, somebody who is called a Jatti, who comes from a kind of a middle class family in Jhelum, who has performed all over the peripheries in this country, not in these big centers, Karachi, urban, to the upwardly mobile sort of intellectual westernized class, but actually the people around her, the people who are likes of her. So I think that kind of success which has been made possible through the characters of Bali Jatti needs to be celebrated, and the great celebrated as an icon, not of just, as I said, of the entertainment industry, a player queen or a queen of the hearts, but also as a real person who actually fought through these various shackles that inhibit the true potential of a woman in the society.
Thank you so much for coming to our show, Nadeem Saab.
My pleasure.
It was a very inspirational conversation, and now I'm all pumped up.
Great.
Friends, that was Nadeem Omar. I loved the conversation with him, but we have another very special guest, Dr. Fouzia Saeed, who is the Executive Director of Virsa, and she had a very, very strong bond with Bali Jatti. Welcome to our studios.
Thank you very much.
Now, Fouzia, you and Bali Jatti were almost like family members. Where did you meet her?
I was determined to do research on these theatre women, this whole theatre phenomena, but I really like to write about folklore through the eyes of women, because that has not happened that much. So I wanted to learn about theatre, but through the eyes of women, because they have a very different story to tell. And I found out about Bali Jatti, as I did about many other theatre women, and I went to see her. I found out about her address and her house, but she had told everybody that Bali Jatti doesn't live here. And she had changed her name, and she just didn't want to. She was very bitter, she was very depressed, and she had obviously left the theatre world.
That's quite odd, because she was so energetic and bold in theatre.
I mean, anything but confidence in her, But no, she was very disgusted or bitter, I would say. And so I really had to carve out some space in her heart and said, no, you have to interview with me and I want to write about it. And gradually as she started opening up, she started sharing with me. Then the bond of course developed. I knew what kind of pans she liked and I used to buy them before I would go to her
And
place.
she also used to massage your hair.
Tail and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then she, once she kind of adopted me as a daughter, then she would, go into her store and dig out her old clothes, and she knew how much I loved parandas and lachas and khussas and churis. So she used to dig out her clothes and say, okay, now you wear this, and then she would decorate me really with all the things and then enjoy, because she said, I find that spirit in you. But just getting to know her was such an honor. Such an honor. The kinds of challenges that we cannot even conceive. And these women have not only survived them, but they actually outgrew them, and they did so well, better than her male counterparts, which were Anayat Hussain Bhatti, Alam Lohar. These were her contemporaries. And the competition used to be with these people. So it was just really a very fulfilling exercise.
So what surprises me, and I was also discussing it with Nadeem Saab, that Punjab itself is a land where the status of women is very much equal to that of status of men. When we look at folklores like Heer Ranjha or Sassi Punnu or Soni Maiwal, the female character is very strong. They represent voice of the society.
Yeah.
And Bali Jatti herself, for me, she is a counterpart of Heer, because she resisted her family.
Yes.
She decided to leave her house.
Eloped at a young age. She fell in love and she left home with another person.
So given these circumstances, how come we see that Bali Jatti had to face resistance from her own colleagues, Anayat Hussain Bhatti?
I think that we have to realize that it is a very patriarchal society. No matter how women have struggled and become strong, yes, Punjabi women have struggled a lot, but they have to face a lot of patriarchal macho values, okay? And this was specifically, it was competition within their profession. So they were competing with each other. Alam Lohar was with Watan Theatre and Anayat Hussain Bhatti was with another theatre. She herself was with different theatres over time, but then her own theatre was Shama Theatre. So they all used to have, many a times, they used to have their theatres in one ground.
Okay.
And they would start singing and their theatre around 9 o'clock, and it would go up to like the morning prayers, and sometimes they would not shut down, and the mullah would come out or other people would say, for God's sake, finish, because they wanted the other person to finish first. And they all were very famous for singing Mirza, and Bali, being a woman, used to sing Mirza, which requires a lot of physical strength also, not just the pakka sur. So she had a very heavy voice.
Okay.
And she, in her earlier age, used to do the Ranjha role rather than Heer's role. So she used to sing Mirza, and she used to hit her leg like this and then, go up. And Alam Lohar used to challenge that nobody can sing Mirza better than he can. And she used to say, okay, you start from there, which means your theatre, and I will be here. And they used to have these primitive loudspeakers, and they would do the taan as high as they could and compete with each other. So they were the contemporaries, that is what happens. But I must say that Alam Lohar had considered her a sister. And I can give you a picture where Alam Lohar is sitting with his two wives, and then Bali is on the side, like a thin, small person.
It's also published in your book, Forgotten Faces.
Yes.
I'll show it to the audience as well. Friends, this is a book, Forgotten Faces, that Virsa published, and Dr. Fouzia wrote it. It's not just about Bali Jatti, there are other characters as well.
Yes.
And I was really amazed to see the detailed work that you have done on all these actresses and singers as well.
I think they deserve much more because they have not been given the credit that they should. And I'm always very big on writing or exploring the lives of women who are in performing arts, because it is very difficult to be in performing arts. I think the stigma is the highest. I mean, you can be a factory laborer, or you can be a fighter jet pilot or a mountaineer or something, but with performing arts somehow it is very tricky because women's reputation gets questioned. The path is very slippery and it's very difficult. So I'm always intrigued and I admire women who have created spaces in performing arts.
Even Bali was not from a traditional
No.
performer's
No.
family.
No, she eloped with Munir, and Munir was the one who exposed her to this colorful world of theatre, because he had been doing small roles, and he was never really a big hero, a husband, but he was very happy that she was taken up by as a lead character, if not a heroine. But like I said, she used to play Ranja, and then in the beginning she had a very hard time reconciling with the fact, because she came from a mainstream society which was not a society of performing arts, so she was not socialized into what performance is and how do you dance and perform, and she didn't have that love for being praised by the audience. So she had a whole internal conflict as to, is it okay, would my God be happy or not, praying and then performing. And then I have discovered that in many of these stories, the theatre women had developed this very interesting framework or ideology, I suppose, that there is an asli chehra and there is a nakli chehra, which means there is a real face and then there is a fake face.
It's like wearing masks in those old Greek theatres.
Really, and they reconciled within themselves that it is okay to be out in front of men and perform and be very seductive, as long as you have your fake mask or mask, which is nakli chehra. So for them, makeup was the thing. Once they had the makeup on, then they were totally transformed into a performer. Once they took off their makeup, then they would go into a burqa, and then they would go into subservient, compliant, a wife who would get beaten up who would get her money snatched away, and then they lived because they were just hopelessly devoted to their husbands, those kinds of stories. But it was very interesting to see how they dealt with the internal conflict. And then these women were out on the stage and people would tear their clothes off and just like worship them like goddesses. And they would follow them around from village to village. Like, for several months the fans would follow them around. They were just totally lost on them. And to deal with that, and then to deal with an abusive husband behind the stage. So it's very, very complex, conflicting kind of realities that they lived with.
What was her obsession with black dresses and heavy jewelry?
I think she liked black very much, and a lot of our artists consider themselves Shia. They are not always Shia, but they would like to associate themselves with Shia. And she said she always loved black, and she thought it was very glamorous. And the concept of beauty is very different in rural Punjab. You would know that. They want a woman to be a little plump, So she used to hold my hand and she says, "What is this? Bone and skin." So I remember, this is just one candid sharing I'm doing. When we invited her to Virsa, I think it was 1990.
Yes.
And she felt that she had gotten too old, and she had these thick glasses where you see the eye, one eye bigger than the other, those kinds of glasses. And then of course she didn't have the money for contact, forget about contact, not even new glasses. So she said, "Fouzia, this will just kill my beauty. So what I'll do is when I get on the stage now, I'll just take off my glasses and you hold me to the center of the stage."
Okay.
And she was not actually seeing the audience, it was all a blur, but she did not want to wear those glasses. And then at home she said that I'm too thin, this is not enough. She was going to wear a black lacha, and she said that I will wear a shalwar underneath. So she wore a heavy shalwar underneath and then her lacha, so that she looks a bit fuller. But it was just so amazing that her presence on the stage and her connection with the audience. I mean, she was so aware of that. The performance comes later, but that whole it's a magical contact, I think, that she was very aware of, and people clapped. And then here she was famous for her swearing also, but her naras, she would do these slogans, Yoli, and and people just die for that. And then she would pick up these fights, like table wala or a ghade wala is kind of teasing her. She would pick the tabla and and almost break somebody's head or something, or throw it in the, and people would just love these gestures. And she was called, of course, Babbar Sherni, because dealing with a rural audience is not an easy job. But these women were so great and so brave and so out there that nobody could dare, abuse them.
You know, we have that clipping from 1990.
No, I did not know that you had that.
Well, you're in for a surprise.
Good, good.
So, thank you so much for coming to our show. And before we leave, we'll play that clip for the audience as well. Friends, let's watch a clip from 1990 where Bali Jatti came to Lok Virsa and we paid a homage to her. Keep watching Folk Beats every Sunday on PTV World. Goodbye.
आज हमारे थिएटर फेस्टिवल का इफ्तिताह है और हमें बहुत ही खुशी है कि इस मौके पर हमारे बीच में एक ऐसी हस्ती है जिसने अपनी तमाम जिंदगी स्टेज के लिए वक्फ की। बाली जट्टी, जिसका नाम
फौजिया बेगम का आप शुक्रिया अदा करें तो मैं उस परवरदिगार का शुक्रिया अदा करती हूँ जिसने ऐसी हस्तियों को पैदा किया इस ज़मीन पे, जिनको थिएटर की इज्जत करना, थिएटर की हौसला अफजाई करनी, थिएटर को फिर दुराने का टाइम दिया परवरदिगार ने, और आप लोगों को भी टाइम दिया हम जैसे गरीबों को बुलाकर देखने का। और फौजिया का मैं बहुत शुक्रिया अदा करती हूँ। मैं बहुत मशकूर हूँ इस बच्ची की। इस बच्ची ने इतना प्यार दिया जो पूरी दुनिया में नहीं मिला। दुनिया में मुझे शोहरत मिली, इज्जत मिली, नाम मिला। दुनिया ने मुझे बहुत सराहा, मेरी बहुत इज्जत की। इतनी मैं थी नहीं जितना मुझे लोगों ने मान दिया। मैं लोगों की बहुत शुक्रगुजार हूँ और इस बच्ची की तो मैं तहे दिल से शुक्रगुजार हूँ कि इसने मुझे 3 साल पहले एक चांस ऐसा था कि मैं आपके सामने आई, मिर्ज़ा भी गाया, डांस भी किया, गाना भी सुनाया, आप लोगों को खुश किया, आप लोगों की हौसला अफजाई की मुस्तहिक सी मुझे आपने दाद दी। अब फिर मैं इतनी बीमार थी कि मैं 4 कदम चल नहीं सकती थी। इसने कहा कि आपने ज़रूर आना है और मुझे इतनी खुशी हुई यहाँ आकर कि फ़न इतनी तरक्की कर गया, इतना अच्छा इन्होंने रक्स किया, इतना अच्छा बच्चों ने डांस किया। बहुत दिल खुश हुआ आप लोगों से मिलकर। 1000 बरस ज़िंदगी हों आप लोगों की। परवरदिगार आपको कभी कोई दुख ना दे। रब्बुल आलमीन इस फौजिया की ज़िंदगी और इसको तरक्की दे। बाप